discuss the possibilities.
All right, hey guys, Joe Klemczewski, founder of the Diet Doc, and I am here with Dr. Eric Helms, who is in New Zealand. And I think, Eric, that's kind of a permanent thing. You're staying over there?
Yeah, we love it here. We got a permanent residency back in March of last year, and we've been here 5.5 years and don't have plans of being in New Zealand. So yeah.
Awesome. And I want to point out that cat meow is on your end. So you're a cat guy, obviously.
I have no idea what you're talking about. So, yeah, that's definitely on my end. We've got two lovely cats, and they can't stand when I Skype with the door closed. So
that is funny. That's hilarious. So hey, I want to get into this this thing that we're doing, which is the camp. Callan Richardson from Calculated Fitness in Tasmania has asked me to come over there and be part of this annual summit. And I said, well, if there's somebody I want beside me, it's got to be Eric Helms. And the reason why is I know you and I have kept in contact a little bit off and on over the years, but now that you are finished with your PhD, you're delving more into creating content and trying to have the biggest impact in the industry. And my journey through the industry has been in a few different places, but I think this is just a great time for us to reconnect. So I'm looking forward to that.
I was hugely honored when you contacted me. I blushed like a small, I'd say 7-year-old girl maybe, when you asked. So I'm definitely interested, and I've been following your stuff for a long time. So yeah, I'm really excited about it as well. I think we're going to have some cool information to present to everybody who's there, and different yet similar breadths of experience and knowledge and complementary stuff that we've learned, and I think it'll be a really cool event. I know I'm going to learn a lot, so I hope the attendees do as well.
Yeah, so I think you and I met exactly 10 years ago, wasn't it, that a camp in 2008 in Sacramento?
Absolutely, yeah. Bob and Tina, I think Dave Gooden, yourself, were all there, and I was a starry-eyed second season, I think, competitor at that point. And yeah, I think Alberto Nunez was there with me and some of the other who would become the 3DMJ coaches were there, and we were all just in attendance as interested competitors, and that was really cool. I remember it was one of the first times I saw your presentations around like perfect peaking, and I think you had a picture of like Phil Heath up, and you were like, maybe he spilled over not because of not getting his carbs right. And it was groundbreaking stuff at the time, and it was very cool. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing everything that has evolved since then.
Yeah, I think at that time I had worked with Brad. If I remember right, I helped him win a pro card. He hired me. We worked together for a season or two, and that event in 2008 was probably before 3DMJ was even created. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So. We met Brad in 2008 because he clashed with Berto a few times. Berto won his pro card at Bob and Tina's show in 2008, and Brad was probably the biggest threat in the overall because he was peeled. And then yeah, it was either 2008 or 2009. I can't remember. I believe it was 2008. And then yeah, I got on stage in 2009. And that was the time, like those conversations we had backstage between Brad, myself, Jeff, and Berto were kind of the little seeds that got planted for what would become, 3DMJ.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's been a wild thing to see in the last 20 years, because when I started out, much like you said, as just a starry-eyed guy, I was in my early 20s, and I was an orthopedic physical therapist, and my passion was training and competing at that time, and I never knew how far I would go. But like any scrapper with some pretty poor genetics, I worked my way through the ranks. And when I was 27, I think, is when I won my pro card. When I started competing in the WNBF, that's when I got to know Steve Downs, and he asked me to start writing for Chalo Publishing, all of their magazines, Natural Bodybuilding and Fitness. and that was kind of my platform. You know, I worked my way into the WNBF, you know, competing of course, but more through that academic and media side, because as I was interested more and more in the physiology of contest prep, I had all my academics in nutrition, but you probably realize yourself that there's quite a bridge. You can go through any amount of education in nutrition, you're learning all that biology and physiology, but to then apply it to something as precise and kind of weird like bodybuilding prep, you know, that takes some pioneering. There just wasn't information there. So at that time when I met you, I was very deep into sorting that out and trying to perfect it. And my laboratory was my business. I don't even know the stats anymore. I know, you know, when I stopped doing contest prep as my primary source of business, I had helped more than 400 people win pro cards, and around that time is when the industry really started exploding. You know, that's when Lane came on board and really took the media push as hard as he could. Then guys like you and Alberto and Brad started springing up, and now in the 10 years or so you've been involved, I'm sure you've seen even crazier jumps. So tell me what you see as kind of the genesis of and the you know, journey of the actual industry.
Absolutely. You know, I think to us, you were definitely a pioneer. I mean, in my mind, and it's very possible that I just wasn't alive early enough, the first online science-based contest prep coach was you that I was aware of. And just like you said, I got exposed to it reading Natural Bodybuilding and Fitness, and I was there at Borders, you know, in the magazine aisle reading that until I think Borders is closed now. So I guess we're showing our age a little bit. And then shortly after that, I remember I think Lane won his pro card, I want to say in 2006, and he started becoming a pretty well-known quantity and presence right around 2005, 2006 when I got on the bodybuilding.com forums. And from 2005 to right around 2008, 2009, I was very much a student of you in the magazines, and sometimes we get on your, I think it was your Perfect Peaking forums, and check out what you guys are talking about, and bodybuilding.com, in addition to, you know, being in school. And I think the fact that you were able to pioneer and try to, like you said, bridge those gaps between more pure physiology and the actual, how does that apply to competition? I really think you not only bridged those gaps, you created a bridge for others to walk across. Because today, when I actually started my bachelor's, I had the plan from day one when I actually transferred into the program. Right, so my goal is to become a bodybuilding and powerlifting coach. That's what I want to do. And I designed my bachelor's around that, my master's, and then the master's and PhD I did out here in New Zealand. And I was able to collect data on competitive bodybuilders and powerlifters in my master's and PhD work. And, you know, we've written articles that are specifically targeted at natural bodybuilders. So I think without the work that folks like yourself and Lane did and others, Peter Fitchin comes to mind, Jeremy Leneke, Chris Foz, a lot of people who have done research in this area who have brought some legitimacy to this field, I don't think I'd be able to do what I did. And I'm hugely thankful for that. So, yeah, the industry has definitely changed a lot. You know, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Shredded by Science Academy, the SBS Academy. Cool. Yeah, so, you know, Dr. Mike Zerdos and I got asked by our close friend, Luke, to help him start this personal training education course, a one-year course that is designed to not only teach someone how to be a personal trainer, but there's an entire module I teach on coaching bodybuilders, and there's an entire module that Dr. Zerdos teaches on coaching powerlifters. So the fact that there is a demand enough for that to be a commodity is, I think it speaks to just how serious this is taken and how well the internet has allowed like-minded people to connect, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. I'm still trying to reconcile that in my mind, because I have to tell you, I stumbled into bodybuilding coaching sort of by necessity and also by accident. And I will say this: when I started writing in gosh, it was 1998, 99 for the WNBF publications. It was still a hobby. I owned a gym and a fitness center, and we were kind of creating a corporate wellness facility that we could just, kind of dominate our local community with. And that platform through those media outlets, way before social media was even around, just created, like you said, you were in Borders, reading my articles and that kind of thing. And to me, this was always just a very sub-niche that was not taken seriously. And so I rode that bubble where, revenue started pouring in. I was seeing, 30, 40 clients a weekend compete, helping them through that. You mentioned Lane. I remember very specifically because he's a friend of mine from my town, Evansville, Indiana. The year I helped him win his pro card, I think he won 2. I was still in my phase of sorting, this stuff out. So I remember very clearly after the prejudging him, calling me saying, "Joe, I'm flat. Here's this. Here's some photos. What should I do?" And I said, "We need to get some sodium in you. Can you get something like a slice of pizza?" That was one of the things I was doing at the time. And he looked around. He said, "No, but there's a Subway across the street." And I said, "Okay, go get a 6-inch sub because that'll be, full of sodium." So by the evening show, that sodium, of course, pulled a lot of extracellular water into his muscle cells, and he was way fuller, harder, tighter. So all of those great things, it was just a blast for me to do. But then I got busy with our Diet Doc franchising because I see the general population work and the what I would consider more legitimate application of nutrition, what people really need and want. So with Dr. Kori Propst, our health psychologist, myself, other people, we've gotten busy, putting 150 to 200 Diet Doc program owners around the world, which Callan is one of those that we're going to be seeing in Tasmania. But I got to say, all of that comes full circle back to you and guys like you talked about, Mike Zordos, Chris Barakat, Jeremy Leneke, all of these guys who have now created such academic fervor. I've spoken with Bill Campbell together side by side at some different events, and you can actually take bodybuilding nutrition courses now in college in exercise science programming, and that blows my mind, dude. That's just I never thought bodybuilding or just physique sport, this kind of extreme application of nutrition, would be mainstream. But because guys like you have made it so, I'm interested now. I'm tapping back into that culture a little bit. I went to the LA Fit Expo and Arnold this year. I'll probably be at the Olympia, and I'm more interested now than the last 10 years at least of getting in and seeing what can be done through solid research, and I know that's your passion is really getting into that evidence-based world. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing right now. What's your driving force in your brain around just training and nutrition? What do you want to set out to study, prove, and bring to the industry?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's got to be so cool to be in your shoes and reflect and see the impact you've had, and I don't put that lightly. I do think you're a huge part of that, and it's great to have you back in the mix. As far as where my head's at, when we set out with with the mission statement for 3D Muscle Journey, we saw it as, look, we want to create a community and then support it, and part of that is providing an evidence-based platform of information. And that's kind of always been the part I've spearheaded as the nerdy guy on the team. So I'm fortunate enough to now be working at AUT, where I got my PhD. That's Auckland University of Technology, as a research fellow, and to have cemented a lot of relationships with other research groups around the globe who are interested in the same stuff. So we've got some pretty cool research projects that are coming out, and even data that right now is being analyzed. So some ones that I'm really excited about is we just got ethical approval to do a study on weight gain, which is surprisingly something that hasn't been researched much. We've got a handful of studies we're basing most of our application on. as far as how quickly should someone gain weight in the off season if they're trying to put on muscle mass. So what we'll be doing is looking at basically a maintenance group, a 5% surplus group, and a 15% surplus group. That's myself, Brad Dieter, and James Krieger, along with, we're going to be conducting primarily the actual the training aspect of the study here at AUT. So I'll be overseeing them lifting weights and making sure it's at an appropriate level and intensity, and all the variables are in place there, while James and Brad are going to be handling the stats and the nutrition side of it through online interaction with the participants. But we're really looking forward to kind of answering this question. So we're going to have resistance trained males with a certain level of experience and strength, not using anabolic steroids, not using other supplements, so we can kind of isolate that variable to how high should energy intake be, and is there an advantage to maybe putting it on faster if it comes at the cost of maybe a little more body fat? Does that help you gain a little more muscle, a little more strength? Or hell, maybe maintenance is worth it. You can put on a little bit, recomposition a little bit, gain strength, and slow down any fat gain. Or maybe the slow gain is kind of the best of both worlds. I think we're going into it with some limited hypotheses that trained lifters should probably gain slower based on the limited data set we have, but we're definitely open to the fact that that could just be an artifact of having not enough data. So that's exciting.
Are you going to be doing blood draws enough to look at things like hormone impact?
Right now, we've got it set to primarily look at some of the clinical outcomes. So we've got ultrasound to look at muscle thickness. We've got some high-level skin folds to look at changes in just the skin folds themselves, not to derive a body fat percentage from that. We'll have strength measures, and then we'll have the training metrics of how will they train, their performance over time. We're not going to be, as now, although we always could write an amendment, looking at any kind of markers at this stage, but that's not a bad idea. It just comes down to, cost, equipment availability, and things like that.
Well, I know when you first started talking about this a couple years ago, because for maybe 10 years I've really discussed metabolic building as a part of the pre-contest phase. I want my clients, by the time they hit the stage, to basically be at full off-season maintenance levels. And because, of course, we still have to prioritize body fat loss and making sure they're lean enough, that does mean it's going to be a very, very slow build. So interestingly, you'll laugh at this, of course, people who are just kind of trolling social media, they will often say, well, Eric says this and Joe says this, and they try and pit these fights against each other. So I took a couple swings at you, always in good fun. I'll always tag you in so you can fight back. But my work always showed that, and again, just as anecdotal, a very slow gain is always more beneficial. But I absolutely defer to your point that sometimes you have to get a little bit more of a rapid gain to create some more homeostatic normalcy for some people. I just can't typically have that luxury before a contest. It would have to be after a contest.
Absolutely, and I'm all about disagreement, because I think that's typically where, especially when you have informed people with data, whether or not that is things they've observed on their own or something from a lab, because where it doesn't connect is typically where there is available nuance and context to learn, to basically fine-tune that information. If people have different views, that probably means, and they're based on something solid, probably means it's not a black and white answer. It can tell you, and how should this tool be used is going to be the outcome of that discussion. And I think in this particular case, we're probably a lot more on the same page than perhaps the internet trolls might think. We always try to tell our clientele, hey, if you're going to compete in July, contact me in July the year prior, because that's when we'd love to make sure that your training's in order, your off season is productive, and ideally we want you eating as much as possible while still being in an appropriate place to start that contest prep, so we don't have 40 pounds to lose, which might result in us losing everything we gain in the off season anyway. So Lane's quote unquote kind of the reverse diet. People see that kind of slow addition of calories while trying to minimize body fat gain. It's kind of what our off season would look like close to a comp. So we're on the same page there.
Right.
I I think, if anything, people may pit us against each other because I'm just less confident that we're actually building the metabolism per se. Because I think when you say things like metabolic building, or you might say, metabolic adaptation, there's the potential perception that when we look at total daily energy expenditure, that we're very confident that we're affecting the BMR side of it.
Yeah, we're not going to disagree. We're not going to disagree on this. I know you're way too smart for that. In a semantic phrase, I should probably say metabolic rebuilding, because I know you're never going to outperform what your genetics allow, and you're still in a very sub-set point space. So I'll give you one example. Client of mine who won the overall women's pro world championships at the WNBF this year. Fantastic lady, Candace Hatch. She had taken about 17 years off to, raise her kids and all of that. The year prior, she had gone to Worlds in LA and placed fourth. And somebody told her, Nancy Andrews said, "Man, you got to contact Joe. You've got the structure, you've got everything, you could win." But she had never used a coach. She had never even heard of such a thing. I mean, 17 years had elapsed, that entire time you and I are talking about, before she had competed again. So this was all very new to her, and it was hard for her to kind of buy into the policy of, we need to get you absolutely your leanest stage ready at least a month prior. And this is how this works in my experience, Eric. She had been used to competing at about 122, 123 pounds. And I said, well, we're going to have to obviously come under that. But if you're shooting for just dive bombing into the show, you not only leave no room for error, but you also are going to still be at those harshest levels of dieting where you're more susceptible to spilling over because of carb sensitivity and all that. So what it took her to get down there, I like to cycle and undulate my dieting a little bit so that we're not impacting the metabolism as negatively as necessary. So we end up maybe at her very, very, very lowest. She's got some weeks where her carbs are around 100 to 125. Fat might have been at a very baseline minimum, 25 to 35 grams. Protein, I probably had her at about 2 times the RDA. So for her, might have been around 130 to 140 grams. So in the 5 to 6 weeks leading up to the show, I went from those levels up to 300 grams of carbs as a baseline. So, just gradually, incrementally building her food intake back up. So now her carbs are doubled. Her fat intake went from 25 or 30 grams to 40 to 50 grams. That was, kind of undulated in there as well. So that was almost a double. And because once we got to those levels, I didn't want to start risking a lot of insulin play with spilling over, maybe storing a little bit more body fat. I started increasing her protein. So by the time we got to peak week, even her protein was up to about 160 grams. So that's almost a hyper-inflated amount of food. I doubt she's even eating that much food right now in the off-season. But coming from that metabolically suppressed dieting position, she's been dieting for 6 months, and you start incrementally building back up, I think you really catch some tailwinds, so to speak, so that you can reach this level where it's almost not normal. I'm sure adrenaline is coming into it. She's practicing her posing more, so activity level's higher. But she ends up the day of the show, tighter than ever, tighter than even when she was on the lower amount of food maybe a month earlier. And of course, obviously a lot fuller, a lot more resilient on contest day to spilling over, so we don't have to worry about that. And as you said, outcome data is she won. Hands down, unanimous, looked crazy. And so that's my terminology explanation for metabolic building, is we're obviously taking somebody from a very suppressed place and building their metabolic capacity, not their basal metabolic rate, up to a level that all of those variables just help sustain the look we need on contest day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had, we've had, as a collective, we've had a number of similar experiences. I would probably characterize that as like on the outlier end of what you can do as a building phase, and I assume you would too. But yeah, I mean, change in total daily energy expenditure. And while most people will cite this whole, it's about 15% is how much metabolic adaptation you can have, that's the mean. But if you go 2 standard or even 3 standard deviations out from how much the expected daily energy expenditure for someone at a body weight after they've lost 10% of the body weight, which is about what most people lose when they get ready for the stage, if they're doing it right, that could be 2/3 of what you might expect. And then it can fully return and then be higher when you overfeed someone in that kind of state. So I've definitely seen similar, where someone's carbs might go from 150 to 300. And like you said, fat might increase by 20, 30 grams without weight gain. So that's even with weight loss.
Right.
And a little bit of fullness, So I wouldn't say it's the norm, but I've done it even personally. I've added about 40, 50 grams of carbohydrates, 10 grams of fat going into a show and looked better for it and lost a little bit of weight. So, I mean, I think even if it's a muted version of that, almost everyone can achieve that if they can get lean before a contest, and it almost always helps, at the very least, with peak week predictability, if not with the look. So
in a general population application, I mean, consider the fact that, of course, the biggest problem we have in weight loss today is that the recidivism rate is so high. People regain all of their weight back. And if you can do this, if you can get back up to a maintenance level of caloric intake without those massive swings going back and forth where somebody all of a sudden gains 10 pounds and then they're back to dieting, and then as you probably know in the research, any amount of yo-yo dieting like that really has a dramatic impact on metabolism, and so it can become just almost a death spiral in people regaining that weight back. So it's going to be interesting. I'm going to really look forward to real research on this. And what I love about what we're doing right now is we're talking about the things that we're going to be covering at Callan's camp, which is in Tasmania, and it's April 7th. I mean, we're down to just under a month where we get to hang out together in Australia. But we have 3 blocks. One of the things that Callan and I talked about is, we want one just basically on nutrition, and that's going to apply to, everybody, competitors, general population people. Here is core nutrition. You and I will talk about the ways to apply that in different levels. We also have an athletic performance block, so people who are very interested in athletics, and so this is where Luke Propst, our training director, who's got a master's in exercise science and is also a very accomplished powerlifter. He's worked with professional and semi-pro athletes, college teams. He was a Division I soccer player himself. Now he's just a crazy, massive powerlifter. So he's going to be Skyping in. You, Luke, and I are going to be talking about that with athletes. Then we're going to get into a block on actual powerlifting and the training aspects, and Luke will be involved with that as well. So powerlifting, training for athletics. I know you love training as much as you do nutrition, so we're going to have a chance to talk about all of that. So this, I'll actually post some of the information on the video so you can see it or under it in the text, but I'm just looking forward to this, man. It's going to be fantastic, covering so many things, and as Callan is building this, there's something for everybody. You could be a 10-year-old baseball athlete, and you can come to this camp to that block and really get something out of it. I do notice that Callan put you on top of me in the flyer, though. Did you tell him that had to be part of the deal?
No, not at all. I think he just thought, people don't really know who Dr. Joe is anymore. He's not that relevant. So if we could just kind of attach him to my coattails, then you might have a little more ability to have, some credibility.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
No worries. I'm here for you.
I need that. So, what do you have anything specifically that you think is kind of revelatory for people in Tasmania, what they're going to learn on the training side?
Man, there's so much to talk about on the training side. I think as we get more and more data, like people like Brad Schoenfeld, who I think he's got it scheduled on his calendar. He has to publish a meta-analysis every month, or he's hasn't met his personal goals.
Right.
We've got so much kind of big picture programming information out there that we can start to really pick at the edges of what maybe the ballpark of what bodybuilders should be in terms of volume, frequency, intensity, different strategies for progressing load over progressing volume, the key variables that underline mechanistically hypertrophy, so we can kind of get pointed in the right direction. My thing has always been that bodybuilders tend to probably overvalue the intensity of a training session and the difficulty of it without being able to take a step back and kind of look at that and longer term progression. So to give them some tools so they can look at ways of assessing whether or not they are indeed probably putting in all the ingredients that are going to result in gaining muscle over time, which it gets harder and harder the more we grow. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then, my personal kind of hobby horse is ways to auto-regulate your training, which really just means because most of us are training on our own with a non-in-person coach, this becomes useful because it's a way to systematically individualize your training. Things like RPE to make sure you're at appropriate distance from failure, using an appropriate load, and even other ways of using RPE to auto-regulate volume or to choose which workout you're going to do on a given day based on your recovery status. There's a lot out there that can apply to bodybuilding and powerlifting as well.
That's awesome.
Maybe even more so to powerlifting, so I'm pretty excited about it.
One of the reasons I have watched your work and I specifically asked Callan to bring you to this camp too is I really think one of your greatest strengths academically is looking at what is most necessary and applicable to people. So from athletics to bodybuilding to nutrition in general, I really appreciate exactly what you're saying there about training, and I'm looking forward to learning from that. And man, it's just great to have you in the industry, not just aggressive exercise science type industry, but I think the impact you're going to have in your career on the entire field academically is going to be amazing. I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Thank you. That's a huge honor to hear you say that. And yeah, that's kind of how my brain works. Is I can't give any guidelines unless we can kind of start with some, like first principle work to kind of drill down to what the main target is, and then we can work logically from there to get in the right kind of arena. So
awesome, man.